I'm Kathryn Bell, CEO of the Webinar Vet, and today I am delighted to be joined by Dr. Amber Parks, a veterinarian turned stress and burnout coach. After experiencing burnout herself while working in veterinary practice, Amber retrains and now helps other vets and professionals to reclaim their time, energy, and sense of balance without necessarily walking away from the career they've worked so hard to build, unless, of course, they want to. In this conversation, we'll be exploring the root causes of stress and burnout in veterinary medicine, how to spot the signs early, and what practical steps we can take to make a real difference in daily life and in our workplaces. So, hi Amber, welcome to VetChat.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, no, thank you so much for being here today. Such important topics that we're going to cover. So, really looking forward to the conversation. So, I guess to start, would you mind? I know I touched upon it a little bit there in the introduction, but would you mind sharing a little bit from your perspective, a little bit about your background, what led you to veterinary medicine in the first place, and how you eventually made that switch over to becoming a coach?
Yeah, absolutely. I, like many of us, love animals, and that's what got me interested in veterinary medicine. When I was growing up, my grandfather was very ill with some kind of odd diseases. And so he was in and out of the hospital a lot. So I visited him in the hospital a lot. And so the hospital setting was very familiar for me, even as like a little kid. I was never, scared to go to the hospital. I was more fascinated with things. And then so with that, and then taking kind of my love of animals just seemed like a natural fit for both of those.
Mhm.
So I would say maybe from age 10 or 11, I know I wanted to go into veterinary practice. And, like many of us, worked hard to get into college and then get into vet school. And when I came out of vet school, I started in a small animal general private practice here in
Mhm.
Florida in the US and had a great mentor. I really enjoyed it a lot. I learned a lot. I'm really thankful for having been in that hospital and having that mentor because I know not everyone gets that.
Mhm.
And like many of us, though, I think being an overachiever, a person who is brought up thinking that, we really have to overexert ourselves to really get to a place where, like we have good work ethics, so we just keep working harder. And I was in practice for about 10 years and I started to get really burnt out with, we had a high caseload. We were understaffed at the time, like many practices, right? We get
Yeah.
someone and then someone else leaves, like, they move or whatever.
Mhm.
And it was to the point that I was like, okay, if I'm going to be working this hard, I'm going to go into relief work and I can make my own schedule and I can work where I want. And I thought that that was the solution to my burnout. And so, in the first maybe year or so of relief work, I was like, this is the solution. I really enjoyed it. I, went to practices that I was like, wow, that was kind of crazy. That was a little bit of a train wreck. I don't want to go back there. And so I had the benefit of not having to.
Mhm.
But eventually, after, a few years in relief work, I ended up getting the same feelings of burnout
Okay.
again and just getting really exhausted, but really resentful. Like even if the day was going well, I was just like everything felt like a process and stressful. So I realized like, okay, there's a common denominator here, and it's not where I work. It's not the team because I could change wherever that was. I was
Yeah.
like, there's a common denominator, and it's me. And
Yeah.
so after going through a lot of therapy and changes, and I realized that it was how I was processing that stress
Mm.
was it didn't matter where I was. And so I see it a lot now too, where we choose relief or locum work, thinking that that's the solution to burnout, and it can feel that way. But ultimately, what I learned, and this is why I got into coaching, was we're just still the same person trying to process stress in the same way,
Mhm.
regardless of where you put us at, too.
Yeah.
So I kind of got into coaching that way of like, wait, I can help you. You don't have to, that's why I say like you don't have to change your job or your career necessarily in
Yeah.
order to find fulfillment and joy in vet med again.
Hmm. Amazing. And then did you kind of train up to be a coach and then sort of never been back to practice since?
Yeah, so I definitely overlapped. I did some training. I was honestly doing the coaching kind of unofficially while I was doing relief work because every practice I went to, I kept seeing the same thing, not just in myself, but in the support team and the
Mm.
doctors. I'm like, we're all experiencing the same thing. So I was very vocal about going to therapy and, kind of the struggles that we deal with in veterinary medicine. And so so people kind of knew me as that person in the practices that I went to, and people would seek out my advice. And so I started kind of coaching unofficially that way. And then in 23, I took some like official classes, if you will, and
Mhm.
certifications. And then the end of last year, I left clinical practice altogether to do this full
Okay.
time.
Amazing. So kind of grew this business alongside that as well.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. So again, from your perspective, like what do you see as the main drivers? I know you said you've seen lots of different things and lots of different practices. What would you sort of say are like the main drivers of stress and burnout?
Yeah, so I think, the obvious is the profession, and we deal with a lot of high stress, high risk. Like, I don't want to negate that at all. And there are definitely toxic workplaces, but I think that this profession, we are a bunch of a lot of over high achieving, compassionate, empathetic people. And so there's a lot of us that are what we call highly sensitive people, which that's
Mm.
actually like an actual term. You could Google it if your listeners have never heard of it. And it makes us perfect for the role because we're very empathetic to our patients and even our, pet owners. But it makes us so much more prone to burnout because we have a hard time having like an emotional barrier in everything.
Mm.
And we, because we're high achievers, like we have worked so hard and we just keep persisting, even if, it's like a train wreck going on, we just keep going.
Yeah.
And so we are tend to be, people pleasers. We want everyone around us to be happy. So we tend to put our own needs second. And so I think it's a culmination of those things. We have a hard time, I know I did, saying no or setting boundaries, or then throw in like the perfectionism. We want every pet obviously to do well and be happy and comfortable. And if we can't, we feel like a failure. So I think it's a culmination of those. And then if we
Yeah.
add in, the stress of our type of practice that we're in and just veterinary medicine and expectations that are expected of us, I think it's like the perfect storm of
Yeah.
all of those that can make us susceptible.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I just wondered as well, did you ever notice any differences in like newly qualified, newly graduated veterinarians versus more experienced? Because I know at the moment at the webinar that we're doing quite a lot to try and support new grads. I just wondered if you kind of noticed any differences there.
Yeah, that's a great question. Before I went into relief work, the hospital I was working at, my mentor was actually branching out and he had several other hospitals. And he said, before you leave, because we had a great working relationship, he said, I actually have a lot of these doctors in this four other practices that are like, I need support in supporting them because I'm doing
Mm.
this business and he's like, so if you want to come on board and help mentor them, like I would love that. And I thought, like, that's great. I would love to do that. What was interesting is some of them were experienced and some of them were newer grads. And I found as the years went on and working with doctors that how they were or weren't mentored when they first got out of practice
Mm.
totally set the tone for how they were as a doctor that's been in practice for 10 or 15 years. In other words, if they had like a really challenging or maybe not a great mentorship initially, it very much affected them, even a decade into practice. They didn't feel that confident. They, second guess themselves even more. So I think, and that's where I think burnout can happen absolutely in our newer grads. But
Mm,
I also see like if we don't get that mentorship, which for what you guys do is so critical, it can
mm,
affect us. It doesn't, we don't just collect a lot of experience and then we're good to go later on in our career. It
yeah.
really set the tone. So yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Um, okay, amazing. And do you think that, I know in your experience it was quite gradual, but do you think that it can just sort of creep up on unnoticed with people? Are there any sort of like red flags that you'd like to share that, might resonate with people who are listening?
Yes, I do think it creeps up. It
Mm,
crept up for myself. I was in burnout for honestly years before I realized it. And the clients that I work with, same thing. We don't really accept failure or like things might not work out. We just keep going.
yeah.
And for me, and I see in a lot of people, a lot of it was like irritability and the exhaustion and like little things that could happen during the day that if I wasn't burnt out wouldn't be a big deal. But if when I was burnt out, it seemed like a huge stressful event that it didn't have to
Mm,
be. Like those are a lot of the things that I experienced and I see repeatedly in people that are burnt out. And I think it's very common that we are in full on burnout for a long time before we actually either know that we are or that we start to realize, like, I need to do something about this.
yeah, absolutely. And are there any sort of like tangible tips that you could give people who might be listening, even just like small little things that they might try and sort of incorporate into their daily routines that might just make that difference with this sort of stress levels?
Yes, I think that number one is just recognize if you are experiencing some of those things that I mentioned, like if you're
Mm.
irritable, the exhaustion doesn't go away, you dread work, you're driving to work, you're in the parking lot at work, you dread going into the building. Like those are all signs that you need to like maybe talk to someone and figure this out because it doesn't just go away.
Mm,
But the other thing is, and this is easier said than done, but focusing on what is in your control can lighten the load, quickly. So we might be upset with a pet owner because maybe they're rude, which that's a whole other podcast episode, but like I'm not saying let them be rude to you,
yeah.
but don't let it, letting it ruin our day. And,
Mm,
for not standing up for ourselves, that's one thing, but if that's we can't change how this person is. It's the same
mm,
thing with maybe a coworker. You can't change how they're going to act, but you can change what you perceive from that. And that's a big thing that if we start to look at everything through that lens of is this in something that's in my control, that can
mm,
definitely reduce stress and start to kind of determine, all right, what can I do? And that
yeah.
sometimes can help in a pinch for sure.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Thank you, Amber. And I guess it's like you touched upon earlier as well. It's about boundaries, I guess, and setting boundaries a little bit. And I guess with sort of clients and even with like colleagues as well. Have you got any sort of advice about how you could sort of communicate these boundaries, in a kind of healthy way that's not going to upset people, but could make a big difference?
Yes, I think boundaries are something we talk about a lot in vet med, and we probably all need them, but we don't always know, and we know that what we should do, and like how to have that conversation, but it feels so uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
there's many of us that would rather sit in the discomfort of ourselves than make it an uncomfortable conversation. And
Mm,
so it's kind of funny when we think of it that way, but I love for setting boundaries. The biggest thing I have is that we use like I need statements. So, hey, I need 10 minutes right now to go sit down at my desk and just look at what I have in front of me and what I have to do.
Hmm.
Or, I need to get something to eat and run to the restroom before I go into that appointment. Instead of, you need to let me go to the bathroom. Like it sounds a little more confrontational. So
Yeah,
I need is like, you're just stating what you need. It's not, no one can really argue with that because you're
yeah,
telling someone what you need. So I think if we remember that and we come from that place, that can be super helpful to set boundaries.
yeah. Nice. Yeah, just that little shift in the language can make a big difference, couldn't it?
Yes, yes,
um, you mentioned uncomfortable conversations, and I think money is always another factor
yes.
that can be uncomfortable, isn't it? So, whether it's like discussing bills with clients or even in your own team, in your own company, whether it's like your pay or whatever it might be. Have you seen money contribute a lot to stress with the sort of clients that you've worked with? And have you got any sort of tips on how we could start to like reframe and manage those situations?
Yes. Yeah. So money's an interesting one because I do see it stress us out. And I think there's a way, you know, of how certain hospitals and practices are run and having, because I've seen a lot in doing relief work, and some were like, oh, the doctors talk about an estimate, or you don't talk about any of that. The support team talks to the doctor. So there's definitely ways to do that, depending on the practice. But number one is whether you're a support team member or a doctor, remembering that our job isn't to like convince the pet owner of
Mm,
we need to do this and why. Like, and that's the hardest part we're not really taught is
mm,
we know what's best for the pet. We know we're the pet's advocate. And so when you show up of here's all this information, you can make the decision, we kind of remove ourselves. And I know it's challenging because pet owners are, the first thing they'll say is like, this is too expensive or this shouldn't cost that. And immediately when we feel that like defensiveness come on, it's everyone has what's called like a money mindset. And it's based on all our experiences with money going back to childhood. So it goes even like way before we get into
interesting.
this profession.
Yeah.
And that's why you get clients that pay $1,000 for something and they're like, oh my God, thank you so much. Like I thought it was going to be more. Like that happens. Or you get a client who's like, that's outrageous. I can't believe you're charging that. And it's the same thing. So when we go to a conversation about money without feeling like we have to convince someone, because we don't know what their experience with money and their money mindset is,
Yeah.
and we're not trying to convince someone, here's the information and you make the decision. And when we come with the energy of that, it just feels different. And I know it doesn't make it any necessarily easier,
Mm,
but we can't convince someone that that same person who thinks that $1,000 procedure was really expensive, we start to be like, well, we have to cover our costs here. We start to like explain ourselves
mm,
and we're kind of just, talking about something that's not going to change this person's perspective. So
yeah.
approaching it of like, that's totally up to you if you think that's too expensive. This is what I recommend and this is why. And
Yeah.
so I think, coming from that place is a different type of energy in that conversation.
Yeah. Nice. And do people get taught this sort of skill enough, do you think? No.
No, and it's uncomfortable, right? Like we've always, I think many of us were brought up with like you don't ask someone how much they make. We don't talk about money, like it's a dirty word. And it's all on most of our minds, if not everyone's mind, at some point throughout the day. So to think, that like we're not really taught about is kind of crazy. But yeah, it's not, it's almost an afterthought, I think. And that's why I think it's important, to talk about it and train our teams on that.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, fab. So, another part of your work that you do now with the coaching is helping people to kind of retrain their minds to respond differently to the stress triggers. Do you have any like tools or like exercises that you tend to use with your clients that our listeners could try with themselves? Even just like a little thing that they might want to give a go, straight after listening to the podcast, say.
Yeah, I think it's getting curious on what triggers us. So for me, I'll give you myself as an example. When I was in practice, my biggest trigger was dealing with like upset clients.
Mhm.
And obviously, I was always worried about the pet, like that's first and foremost, but a big trigger was dealing with upset clients. And I never realized this until a few years ago is what it was is that I have this fear of like disappointing people or a fear of conflict. It was all these things, fear of conflict. It was um, like the shame of like someone's upset with me. And so what I would offer to someone listening is when you feel some sort of emotion that you don't want to feel, that could be anxiety, stress, overwhelm,
Yeah.
ask yourself just why. Like, why do I feel that way? Like for myself, this client's upset with me. Why do I feel this way? Well, I don't want them to be upset. Okay, but why? Well, I feel like ultimately I felt like that was a determination of how good I was as a doctor
Mm.
and how I was as a person. But I think someone listening, if they can just get curious, number one, because we can't heal or cure something we don't know exists.
Mm.
And that's where we get frustrated with like maybe an upset client. I know I did, but it was really like I have a colleague who's not rattled by this upset client whatsoever because their experience was different.
Mm.
So asking ourselves, like, really get to the why this person is really getting to me or the situation is getting to me, because once we know that, then we can heal it. And it sounds so simple, but I think we miss that a lot of the times. We hope that maybe that client just doesn't get upset. I know I did, it's like, well, we can hope all day long, but you know,
Yeah. No, that's really good advice. I might try that myself next time I'm feeling a bit
yes,
stressed. Yeah, and see where I get to when I'm being curious.
yes, exactly.
um, so if you could go back, way back when, to your younger self, you're just starting out in practice, would you have one piece of advice that you would give yourself on managing stress and the expectations around it?
Yeah, this is going to be, I'll have to explain it because it won't make sense initially, but my advice I would give myself is it's not my job as a veterinarian to cure this pet. And what I mean by that is we know practice is not perfect. That's why it's called practice. And do I, though, take a lot of my expertise, knowledge, experience, education, and make very informed recommendations and treatment plans based off of that 100%. Do the pets get better? Yes, most of the time. But I think what we forget is when a pet doesn't get better, we immediately think we messed up somewhere.
Mm.
And what I want to just offer is that there's so much of a spectrum that we can't control and whether that pet gets better or not that we forget. And so we will always then at some point will get very disappointed because the pet didn't get better. Well, whether or not the client's going to tell us this, did they give the meds? Did they give them like how they were supposed to? Is there something else going on that is completely unbeknownst to us that we wouldn't know?
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of factors. So yes, many of the pets get better, but if they don't, that doesn't necessarily completely equate to we're a bad doctor and we're not doing something wrong.
Mm.
And so I that's huge because we do learn from those situations to go forward. But when we are kind of trained to be, we're kind of trained like, here's the problem, here's the test, here's how we fix it. Life goes on, right? Like it's easy and it's simple, and it's never like that. So that would be the piece of advice that I would give anyone, honestly.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then finally, we're just running out of time, but just to wrap up, I know that a lot of people who are listening, a lot of what you've said today will really be sort of resonating with them. Um, if you could offer them one piece of advice, if they're recognizing, some of the signs that you've mentioned in themselves, what would be like the first step that you would suggest that they take today so that they can try and find a more healthier balance in their lives?
Yeah, I think the first step would be to have a plan. And by that, I mean, you don't have to have every step like, how do I get out of burnout? How do I stop the stress? It's just, what is my next step? Maybe that's talking to a coach like myself, or a therapist, or a really trusted colleague, because the feeling of being stuck and not having like a next step it just compounds that stressful feeling. So being able to just know, like, all right, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, I think can feel very freeing when we feel really hopeless and stressed
Mm.
and overwhelmed.
Yeah. Okay, amazing. Thank you. And if anybody does want to get in touch with you personally, if they had any more questions or, they wanted to have a little chat, how are they best to get in touch with you, please?
Yes, so you can find me on Instagram and Facebook, the Stress and Burnout Coach. For Instagram, there's underscore in between all those words, the Stress and Burnout Coach. Or my website is thestressandburnoutcoach.com. And send me a message. You can send me a message on the website too, and we can chat and see if I can help you and what that looks like going forward, because you don't have to stay miserable, I promise.
That's brilliant, Amber. Thank you so much. We're gonna put the recording of this. Obviously, it will go on all the usual channels, where people get their podcasts. But at the Webinar Vet, we also have a wellbeing hub which we keep updated regularly. So in October, we're focusing on stress management. So this podcast is perfectly timed for that. So with the podcast, we'll put all the links on to your socials and things as well, so people can reach out directly there to you if they wish to.
Perfect. Yes, I would love that. I love that. And I'm an open book. Anyone wants to chat, I'd love to have a conversation. So thank you.
Amazing. Oh, well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been lovely to hear all about your journey. And I genuinely know that when we do these podcasts or webinars, they can really, really help people, and they can provide the tools and the knowledge to, protect their well-being. So hopefully people will really, appreciate your episode today. I know that I did. So thank you very much for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. Absolutely.
Oh, thanks so much. Bye.
Take care.